Welcome to another of our time control webcasts. My name is Chris Vandersloot. I'm the president of HMS Software. Today we're discussing time control and how it can be used in a research and development tax credit. HMS Software has a long history going back to the early 1980s, where we started in creating project management systems and timesheet systems for organizations, and having those timesheet systems link both to project management and to finance aspects of the organization. Time Control became a commercial product in 1994 and is linked to many different products both in the finance and project management side, and is now in its 6th generation. Okay, let's turn our attention to R&D tax claims. Research and development tax claims are something created by organizations, by governments all over the world, to provide incentive for organizations to locate their R&D tax activities in that jurisdiction. They're designed to provide certain kinds of incentives to move R&D personnel or to keep R&D type of personnel in that area, to provide employment for R&D type of activities in that location, and to provide the kinds of activities that may lead to longer term benefits, such as employment in high-end manufacturing or high-end R&D type activities in that location. Jurisdictions all over the world have research activities, but let's concentrate on just a couple. If we start with the USA, those who've done R&D credits before will be familiar with the 6765 form from the IRS. This form is for research credits, and qualified research expenditures can be claimed on the organization's tax return, and those qualified expenditures can then qualify for R&D credits over a number of years in a project. So multi-year projects are supported in the IRS's program. This program has been very successful across the U.S. in providing incentive to either relocate or to maintain activities in certain parts of the country. And the IRS goes out of its way to say that the type of substantiating documentation that's required includes the ability to identify what work was done by the employee at a subcomponent level, not just whether the employee was in attendance or that they worked on that project, but what work they did inside of the project that was eligible versus non-eligible on the R&D tax credit side. If you look at the Time Control website, you'll see there's a number of testimonials and case studies, such as the one from Parker Hannifin, where the IRS made a point of saying to Parker Hannifin that Time Control was a good example of documentation for a successful R&D tax claim. If we look at Canada, the Canadian SRED program has been very successful. SRED stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development. This program has been going from Revenue Canada, the Canadian Tax Department, for many, many years. And Revenue Canada makes a point of saying that timesheets have to be used to identify what work is eligible versus non-eligible. And the summary of that ends up on the R&D 661 claim form as part of the organization's tax return. Revenue Canada has an extensive site explaining what types of activities are eligible, what kinds of employees are eligible, and some of the other criteria that are important to making sure there's a successful tax claim. Specifically within Canada, in the province of Quebec, where HMS is headquartered, there is an additional incentive program to make sure that people who are considering doing R&D in Canada pay particular attention to doing that R&D in the province of Quebec. The RD 222 form becomes familiar for the provincial tax return there, and the program is a refundable tax credit program in Canada and in Quebec for certain kinds of organizations. Again, the Quebec website identifies what kinds of employees and organizations are eligible. It takes its cue for what types of activities are eligible from the SRED federal claim, and then credits some portion of the amount that was not credited by the federal government only for those activities that occurred inside the province of Quebec. And again, this information has to be backed up by timesheets that show the eligible expenditures and where that work occurred. There are numerous other jurisdictions to talk about. The UK has a program that's managed by the Revenue and Customs Department. Australia has a tax credit incentive program. Numerous countries inside the EU have a program, and EU tax credits are discussed by the European Union's rules for transactions between countries. You'll need to look for each of your jurisdictions in terms of finding out what the rules are for tax credits in your location, in your geographic location. One thing that is common to tax credits around the world is the way that audits work. And typically audits have two phases. The first is a technical phase, which really looks at the project's description overall and says, well, was this project something that was eligible for R&D in the first place? Did this meet the standard for that jurisdiction's qualification for an R&D type of project? If the answer is yes, then the audit turns to the financial aspect of the audit for exactly what was claimed. And in the financial aspect, we come across something that we call the triangle audit. This starts typically with the HR and payroll records. The auditor says, well, what did you pay people? We want to see the pay books. If you claimed $100,000 for a particular employee and yet you only paid them $60,000 for the year, then your audit's going to have a problem before it gets too far. If that person was claimed for an entire year and yet only worked for half of the year in the HR records, again, you're going to have a problem in the audit before you go very far. Once the payroll records are reviewed, and that is generally something that happens quite quickly, attention turns to the timesheets. The auditor goes looking for a complete record of all 52 weeks. Do we see 100% of the hours here? And are the hours divided between those types of activities which are eligible versus non-eligible? And they're looking for complete compliancy across the organization. When they look at the total eligible hours or the eligible cost, then they match that amount to the amount that was claimed in the R&D tax claim summary. If those match, then that part of the audit becomes complete. And finally, attention turns to the project information. Was there a project plan for this project? And does the progress that we found in the timesheet match the progress that we see in the project schedule? If all three of these match, then the audit is effectively over. There's nowhere else to turn. And having all of this information balanced can only be done when the source information for HR, for payroll, and for timesheets and for project management comes from the same type of timesheet, such as TimeControl. Some basic R&D rules that apply to all the R&D programs that we've encountered. First of all, that the R&D credit has to be for eligible activities. So if you're doing software code that's innovative, that may qualify. But marketing that code probably does not. You're going to have to look for the specific definitions inside the tax jurisdiction that you're in to determine what is a qualified activity or not. But those definitions are very important. Secondly, the credit's got to be for work done by eligible workers. Eligible workers may have something to do with where the worker was located, with the full or part-time equivalent status of that worker, with whether they were a contractor or employee, with whether that worker was a citizen or not. You'll have to look again for the rules for what constitutes eligible workers and eligible work. And finally, the claimant's got to be able to document the work at the detail level. Not just were they in attendance and were they an R&D type of person, but what tasks did they do work on? And were those tasks defined as eligible versus ineligible tasks? That really speaks to using a timesheet type of system. For successful claims, you're going to need a few things on the financial side. On the technical side, which we're really not covering here, you're going to need additional information to say, did the project qualify at all? But once you get through that, then on the financial side, you're going to need a project plan, and that project plan is going to have to be able to identify eligible versus ineligible tasks. Then you're going to need to have a progress for the taxation year. The project plan may be multi-year, but the progress has to be for this fiscal year. And that's going to need to include timesheet type of data from a system like TimeControl that said for this fiscal year, what time was spent on eligible versus ineligible tasks, and the total should add up to that person's total employment record. And a typical audit is going to be the triangle type of audit. It's going to start with the payroll and HR records, then it's going to move to the timesheets, and then it's going to take a look at the project progress. And that's really the kind of environment that TimeControl was designed for. When we come into an organization and we talk about timesheets, we see a lot of different kinds of timesheets. The most common is going to be a time and attendance type of system, where we simply mark that a person was in attendance or not. And that's very important for payroll, for HR to be able to say, well, was this person here? Did they take vacation time? Were they absent for sick leave? Something like that. Time and billing systems, also very common. If we're doing billing, then we need to know the client and we need to have enough of a description of the work done to be able to justify that invoice. Work that is invoiced to another is typically not available for an R&D tax claim. On the project management side, we want to be able to tie time to an original plan. So we had an expectation of time being spent on a certain task. How much time did we spend on that task? And how much time do we have remaining in order to complete that task? And finally, for a whole range of government compliance issues, such as R&D tax claims, the Defense Contract Audit Agency, the EU time directives, the Sarbanes-Oxley, and other kinds of requirements, we see timesheets that are made for all of those kinds of forms. The idea of time control was to create one source of timesheet data that would be able to be used for all of this information at the same time. And when we think about the triangle audit, having a single source of timesheet data that serves the HR system, that serves the payroll system, that can be used if need be for billing, even internal billing, that can update the project system and then can generate reports for R&D tax credits, means that R&D credits don't need any reconciliation. The source data becomes the key data for all of those reports. Okay, let's take a look at time control configured for an R&D tax claim and look at a couple of the ways that we are able to use time control's functionality for that. Okay, here we are in time control. Let's start off by taking a look at how time control might look for an end user. I've logged in here as Gail Robinson. We can see Gail has her own dashboard. It's telling her how much vacation time she's taken, how much she has left. It says she's posted a timesheet for last week. And we can go right to the timesheet area so that Gail can enter a new timesheet for the coming week in the system. When we go to the timesheet area, we can define for end users that the timesheet should include a list, or we should see it straight in the timesheet view. In this case, we've set up Gail's to look simply like a list. And we're going to click on adding a timesheet. Time control will default to the next appropriate week. We can also copy from a previous week. But in Gail's case, we've also set up some preloaded charges from a project management system. So work that Gail was expected to do should appear as possible charges in her timesheet list. We can see that we have the week already set up. We have some fields already available here, and some work that's already been made available for us to select from, including general meetings, a project called the Boat Show, and a project called Polar. Well, if we edit a couple of these to put in some work, we can say, well, Gail did some work on the Boat Show for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. We'll save that. She did some meetings also during the week. Some internal meetings always seem to be part of the week, so we'll put some of those in. Say 2 hours a day of meetings. And let's take a look at a couple of these bottom charges here, the Polar 1.2 and Polar 1.2 charges. And we'll say we spent 2 hours on these, then 3, then 2, then 2, and the balance of the time was spent on Polar 1.1. Gail could also add charges here by clicking on Insert or Append and select from the project list or have other charges available to her. We're just going to finish off the timesheet here. One of the things that's also possible is that different charges here have been marked as research and development or non-research and development charges, and we can see this by looking at the additional information for each of these charges. So for the Polar 1.1 project, we can see this is an R&D eligible charge. If we highlight the Boat Show project, an exhibitor project, looks like a marketing project here, and we look at that information, well, Boat Show 1.13, that is a non-eligible charge and non-billable. So different charges can include different information. And as we scroll in and out, we can see different information available to us on each of those lines. All right, so let's collapse those back again, and we'll move on. So we have a timesheet here that's been completed. We can release that for approval now. It will go to Tom Logan for approval because that's Gail's supervisor. And in the background, time control will check all validation rules that may be appropriate for this timesheet. Project managers will also be able to review this information before it goes back to any kind of project management system, and they'll be allowed to redistribute hours if required between different charges if there was an error made here. Well, that's as the end user. As you can see, entering a timesheet is very simple, but how did we configure TimeControl for research and development tax credits? To look at that, we have to log in as an administrator, and let me log in as an administrator here so that we can see what configuration was required inside the system. So Joe Gardner is an administrator in TimeControl, and we have some dashboards, perhaps more appropriate to the administrator. We can say a certain amount of R&D versus non-R&D. What we really want to look at here is two things. First, the tables and what table configuration was changed. And in the tables area, we'll look first at the project table. And this identifies which projects may have been R&D projects. You can see down at the bottom we have possible R&D or non-R&D projects. And certain projects can be R&D projects, certain projects non-R&D projects. We can add as many of these types of fields to any table that we wish. So this is very important for us to know. These are the projects that we don't want to include. And a project like Polar, definitely an R&D project, we do want to include that in our R&D tax claim. We also have to look at the charge table. So within each project, we can have items that go all the way down to the task level, and you define how much detail is required for each project. These are the kinds of project charges that we just saw on Gail's timesheet. And if we look down at the Polar project, we can see we have a hierarchical view there, and we can take, I think we had 1.1 and 1.2 were possible charges, and we have additional fields here. This was an R&D eligible charge. And if we look at the boat show project, we had that also. 1.13 was the one that we had, non-eligible. So this is where we code charges to determine whether a charge should be eligible or non-eligible. We can also pull this information if you're linked to a project management system directly from that project management system. Finally, employees, we need to know whether an employee falls into a particular jurisdiction or not. Was this an employee who did work in the US, or an employee who did work in Canada, or in Quebec, or in another government jurisdiction? And we can code the information also. Let's take a look where Gail was. So other information, well, she was in Canada and in the Quebec region, so that work that Gail did for work in R&D that was eligible might have applied to the Quebec R&D tax credits and the Canada R&D tax credits. So in creating these kinds of user-defined fields, we can condition the data that we need to see, both in terms of what work is eligible, what projects are included in the claim, and on the worker side, where are those workers from, and are they salary or contract type people? All of that brings us to the end of year reports, where we can do a fiscal year and take a look at reports specifically for R&D. And TimeControl allows us to create reports, either summary reports or detailed reports, that are designed to work for our R&D claim. In this report, we could select a range of dates. In this case, we put in some data for December. So we'll select the December dates and put in a value there. We'll say from the 1st of December until the end of December. And when we run the report, we should see only that December information. So that's our monthly report for R&D, and we can see it looks a little bit like a spreadsheet. All TimeControl reports look this way. In fact, they can even be saved as an Excel type of spreadsheet. And we'll just scroll to the right. There we go. We have hours per task for eligible versus non-eligible tasks. And if it's non-eligible or eligible, you don't need to repeat that. These are all sorted by eligible, then non-eligible. And we can see the exact hours that were posted for each of these people in a very detailed level. We can create as many of these types of reports, whether summary or detailed, as are required to meet the R&D tax claim requirements for our particular jurisdiction. So a system that is designed to be very easy for the end user, not a lot of questions for the end user to answer, and yet all the robustness we require to condition the data in the back end so that the administrators can make sure that as data is entered, it is put into the appropriate category for the appropriate tax claim or non-eligible category. Okay, let's go back to our slides now and wrap up our presentation.